Right, everyone, I bought a new camera. Well, it's actually an old camera again, but it's new to me again. It's one I've had in the past, and I bought it specifically for landscape photography. And I wanted to talk to you today about why I bought it and the lenses that I got to go with it. I think that this might be possibly the best value for money landscape photography setup that there is, and one of the best purchases you can make in terms of old cameras right now. Now, this doesn't take anything away from the things I've said about the 5D Mark II and the 6D Mark I and so on, but this camera brings its own different uniqueness to the game as well. And the camera that I've gone for is the Nikon D750. I've owned this in the past. I've still got the Nikon D600. I wanted to get this camera again though, and there's a few reasons why, and I'm going to explain them. And I'll tell you my lens choices as well. One of the things I really like with the D750 is just how small it is. I think nowadays we're starting to appreciate more and more the smaller form factor of cameras, but what they really got right with this was the grip on it. So the grip on it is really substantial and deep, and you can get all of your fingers onto it. That's going to be a revelation if you're used to shooting mirrorless cameras. This is far more comfortable than any of the mirrorless cameras that are out now, apart from probably the Z8, the Z9, and the R3. I've handled most, and this is very, very comfortable to hold. It's really nice, and it's good to have these kind of deep grips, especially if you're working and you've got gloves on. Now, one downside of it is that the control layout is perhaps a little bit squished together. This isn't a deal breaker or anything, it's just something that you need to be aware of. Because it's a smaller camera, a lot of the controls are quite close together as well. But it gives you a slightly lighter weight camera and easy to pack as well, which I think is a really good advantage of it. One of the best features on the D750 should be pretty obvious really, and that's that it's got this tilt screen on the back of it. So you can tilt it up like this, and you can go down like that, which is, you know, pretty good. You can get a lot of different angles. Now, it won't tilt sideways, but that's a huge upgrade on having just a fixed screen on the back of the camera. I don't actually use tilt screens to do the tilt functionality that much, but one genre that I do is in landscapes, because with landscapes it's just so useful, whether you're doing it handheld or if you're using it off a tripod. To be able to get the screen out like this and see what you're doing is really useful. The screen on the camera as well is really clear, it's very bright, it's very easy to see what you're doing. It's a good quality screen on the back of it. But I think I got to the point with the landscapes that I just thought, you know what, I really want to have a camera that is going to give me that tilt screen functionality, but that I can kind of beat up a bit. This is something that's key to me, because a lot of you will know that I've got the A7R5 and I use that for my work. But the point of that is that I don't really feel like I want to risk that much with it, because it's not even the case of damaging it there. It's just that if you've got a job coming up and then you damage it, these things do cause problems. Just having a camera like this, which I can just use and sort of abuse and just get on with it for landscapes. That doesn't mean that I won't use the Sony in the future, perhaps for doing landscape photography, but I don't think that the Sony, other than megapixels, brings anything to the game that this can't do. So the only thing that the Sony A7R5, which I own, can do that this can't is the megapixel count. And for landscapes, it would be nice, but it's not like something that I need. I'm not that fussed with that. If you're shooting handheld, this is a much more comfortable camera to use. It's actually a nicer user experience, believe it or not. And Sony really excels with its focusing system. But let's touch on this. Let's say that you shoot landscapes, but you also want to do some portraiture. And you're like me, you do a bit of portraiture, a bit of wedding photography, maybe something like that, or maybe you do family photography, that kind of thing. The focus system on the D750 is really very, very good. It's very fast. It has I think it's a slightly larger spread of focus points than the D600, but they work very, very well. Now, if let's say, I know it's not really a fair comparison, but if I were to talk like what does the experience feel like compared to the A7R5? Okay, so the A7R5 is better, but this is kind of, you're splitting hairs at this point, because the keeper rate on a camera like this is so high that you won't care. It doesn't really matter that much. And there's certain times, I think, where with mirrorless, one of the difficulties, it's like an advantage and a disadvantage, I think, in equal amounts, is that you have to kind of select your focus modes all the time. You have to, do I want to have the box and move it around? Do I want that 3D tracking? Do I want to have all area autofocus? And you lose time in the transition between those focusing systems to a degree. The advantages that mirrorless has for the focusing system, when you compare it to cameras like this, which are really, really fast with a traditional focusing system. It's just not that much. And I think that the user experience is more fun, definitely on this. When it comes to certain work things, I think mirrorless takes the edge because it's easier to confirm focus on mirrorless, to just know that you've definitely got it. Whereas I think with DSLRs, you're still taking a few shots as a sort of a safety buffer, if you like. But then if you compare the price difference with it, and then you just see how many shots are in focus on a camera like this, you're talking about, I can show you in a test the difference, but the real world difference just isn't that much. So the focusing system on this is excellent, and it's fantastic in low light as well. It's really kind of surprising to go from the A7R5 and pick up this camera and then just kind of be amazed and think, wow, the difference is just so small that it's kind of shocking to feel that I felt that there was so much improvement with mirrorless. And then a camera like this just shows you that, okay, yeah, there is improvement, but it's not as great as you might think. There's two other things that this camera has as well, which are, in this instance, I think worth mentioning. Okay, one is the dynamic range. The dynamic range is really good, but I really don't care too much about that for landscape photography because I can bracket my exposures most of the time. So even when I shoot on the 5D Mark II for landscapes, I don't really care about its limited dynamic range. I mean, it has got very limited dynamic range, the 5D Mark II, but it's not really a thing. But I think it's worth mentioning at least that the dynamic range on this camera is very, very good. It has really noticeably excellent retention in the shadows in particular. I sometimes feel like Nikon doesn't do such a great job of preserving highlights, so you do have to be a bit careful. You have to watch your histograms and make sure that you aren't blowing any areas that you might want to retain. I feel like Canon always seems to do, this is subjective, like I'm not saying that I know this for definite, I'm just saying what I feel from experience is I feel like Canon preserves the highlights a bit better. I'm not sure if that's even true, but I think so. The other thing I'm going to mention on this, and it's another one of those areas where I'll often say to people, just don't worry so much about this. But because it's so outstandingly good at it, I think it has to be mentioned in this case. The ISO performance on this camera is so good that it might even be better than the Nikon D3S. I would have to do a test to check that, but it's really outstanding. I think most people know that the Nikon D750 has good high ISO performance. I just don't know whether they know how good it is. People always say, but yeah, if you've got a high megapixel camera, you can downsample it afterwards and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, maybe that's true. I'm not sure. I shot this picture, which I'm going to show you now. It's just a little test picture. This is at 12,800 ISO. And it's not one of those shots where it's like daylight and you just crank up the shutter speed. This is only lit by my monitor. It's taken at night time in a completely otherwise dark room. So this is a true 12,800 ISO picture. You need to, when you test cameras like this, if you want to see how good the ISO performs, you need to do something that's closer to a real world test. So you need to, if you want to do a high ISO test, make it actually dark. So the lighting is like that kind of lighting that you get in those low light conditions. And you can see when I zoom into 100%, you get with Nikon this monochromatic noise or grain. It doesn't have much in sort of green and magenta speckles or anything like that. The other thing you get on the D750 is this here. You get the user programmable modes, U1 and U2. So you can set the camera up a certain way, save it to U1, set it up a different way and set it to U2. That's really nice to have. It's a nice little feature on this camera. The sort of, these semi-pro Nikons have that feature. And then when you step up, they remove it because this is from that time period where things like a tilt screen, right, and user programmable modes were seen as only semi-serious. That was like, oh, that's more beginnerish if you have these things. When in fact, this is the stuff that people want in their cameras, but these camera companies, they're not quick at reacting to what the market wants. So they kind of see this as like, oh, let's give the beginners, their little tilt screen. When in fact, this is, everyone loves these things now. So they put it into the D750. So you get this smaller camera with this excellent performance. And what I did with it is I got one of these little L brackets. I'll leave a link in the description because it was only £20 and it fits the camera. It doesn't come out to the end, but you don't need it to because you don't need that grip extension on a camera like this because even if you've got large hands, this will fit your hand. Now let me come on to the lenses that I bought. So you can see I bought 3 lenses so far for this. And I'll try and explain to you why I bought them. This is the Nikon 24-120 f4 and it has VR. Now, the reason I wanted this was obviously for its range. I find that most of my landscape work is either very wide or it's in that sort of middle range zoom like a 24-70 would have. I don't want a 24-70 because it's got less zoom range than this, which goes to 120. I'm going to probably be at f8 or f4 a lot of the time anyway. And the VR allows me to do a lot of handheld shots because I like to do a lot of handheld photos when I'm doing landscapes as well. So that kind of helps with that aspect of it. Optically, I mean, I've had this lens for a long time before and I just rebought it again. So optically, the 24-120, I would say is just a reasonably good. It's kind of okay to reasonably good. Let's give it a mark out of 10. Let's say it's a 6.5. I can't think 6 is a little bit harsh. 7's probably going a little bit far. So maybe like a 6.5 would be about right. So what does that mean for people? That means that you've got some of the negatives that you get with something that's verging on a super zoom. So it's not necessarily optically the best, but it would certainly be optically good enough. I've shot weddings on the 24-120 on these cameras and performed brilliantly for that. I think this is optically good enough to do anything that you want to do. It's just not going to be one of those ones that's outstanding, but you're swapping that for the flexibility that you get. And I think it's worth the trade-off in that sense, because now I probably don't have to carry a 70-200, and I think it's lighter than the 24-72.8, which wouldn't give me the same reach. So I went for this lens. It's a lens that I would recommend to people, and I would always just say to you, just be aware that it's not optically the best lens out there, but it's certainly optically good enough for most things. But you are going to see the 24 megapixel sensor on this is probably about its limit, but you could use it on a D800 or a D810 or something like that as well. But you're not going to see the most out of your camera with that. But I would just use it anyway. I don't think it matters that much. People fuss about these things probably a little bit too much. Now, I've got two more lenses to show you. So the other one I got is the 14-24 2.8, a lens which I've had before as well. This lens I got it in mint condition. I mean, this is like brand new condition from MPB. Not sponsored by MPB. I use them. I like them as a company, and I got it for like £500 or so, which is crazy when you think about how good a lens is. This lens optically is probably like a 9 out of 10. It's superb, really, really good. And they do a 16-35 f4. Now that lens I don't like. I just think that that's too optically compromised for me. I think optically, for me, it's been worse than the 24-120. It's bigger and heavier somehow. It seems, maybe it's not, but it feels like it's a lot bigger and heavier than this one. And being an f4 with it has to be better than that for me. I don't think it's quite good enough. The reason that I went for the 2.8 though, I have a specific reasoning for this. And it's because I want to do some nighttime work, some astro and nighttime landscape photography. And the 2.8, even though the ISO performance is excellent, the 2.8 gives you that, sort of better ability to do the night sky. And so I think it makes more sense to go for this. The other lens I went for is one of my favorite DSLR lenses. It is the 50mm 1.4G. The reason that I really like this lens in particular is because it's not as sharp as the 1.8s and it's not as contrasty as the 1.8s. That lower contrast, softer look is what I want this lens for, and it's very, very good at it. And I really love that it's small and compact and packable. So will I use this for landscape photography? Yes, I will. I'll use it for more of those intimate things where you're just sort of isolating a certain area of a picture. Like if you're doing pictures of lone trees and things, or any kind of plants that are interesting to you, isolating them with this and going for sort of a more dreamy look is really nice. I've always stated to people that I could probably have scraped through most of my career so far. Well, I couldn't, but like almost, with just a lens like this on a camera. It's kind of, it makes me, this whole thing about these 50mm lenses does make me think sometimes about how much we actually need. Like, what do we actually need in order to do a job? I really recommend this lens, the 50mm. And I know it's kind of weird to think of landscape photographers using prime lenses like this, but I'm hoping to try and do some work in the next few weeks that shows you guys what you can do with maybe it's just a 51.8 that you've got or something, that you can actually go out and do things with lenses like that. So that's my goal for this. And yeah, I'd recommend this as a setup and alternative as well. For those of you that know me and you've got your 5D Mark IIs or 60 Mark 1s or 5D classics and so on, just stick with them. This is me playing with camera gear. Just be aware of that. This is just me playing with camera gear, wanting to do different things and try different things out, and a bit of nostalgia for me as well, that kind of stuff. And I hope you will enjoy some of the videos that are coming up, some of the landscape videos that I'm going to be doing with this kit. Anyway, that's it for today. I'll see you again next video. Take care. Bye bye.